Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience: physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society, in the creative space, within the social space. Our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Is this the fourth one we've done?
I don't know. I
think it is.
That's all right.
I might have been on the most so far. I don't know who else you've talked to.
That's right.
Keep it that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we're back with Garrett Dailey here on the Best Medicine podcast with your host, Bradley H. Werrell. Garrett's going to tell us a little bit about how he came to be what he is and exactly what he does, just to kind of give us a background information about the gentleman.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. I've had like 15 jobs. I've had a very weird life. At some point shortly after high school, I kind of was like, oh, it'd be kind of weird if you told me a year ago I was doing this, I wouldn't have believed you. And then the pace of that increased enough that it's like every 6 months or so, it'd be like, yeah, I would not have expected to be doing this. And so I just kind of don't anticipate what I'm going to be doing anymore. And you'll kind of see why, I guess. So let's see. I don't know. When I was a kid, like, when I was in high school and stuff, I really wanted to design cities or something to that extent. And like, there's urban planning, but there really isn't a job for that. Really, nobody does that. So there was never really a job for what I wanted to do, but I was into a lot of stuff. In high school, some of my varied interests included filmmaking. I wrote a script for a zombie movie and tried to get, I got a bunch of people signed up to do it, but nobody showed up. So nobody actually did it. But I had like a dummy, a dummy made out of a flight suit and duct tape and newspaper that we were, like a stunt double thing. You'd throw it off the roof. And we built like a chain gun out of a rotary sander and some wood, like PVC pipes. That was pretty cool. So I don't know. So we did that for a while. I was at one point wanted to be a stage magician. So I was into a lot of weird stuff. I wanted to make a video game. So I started teaching myself how to do like 3D modeling, and I built a team for that. And then nobody helped. So that was it's kind of a recurring theme of my young life. Is like, oh, nobody actually wants to do any work. So I became very like solitary in my pursuits, I guess. And so basically, I don't know. I got a speeding ticket when I was in high school, and I was graduating early. So I was, like I had my car for like 3 months. I lost my license because I was going very, very fast. So the only job I could get out of high school, because I didn't want to go to college at the time, I had problems with the educational system. So the only job I could have was working for my neighbor, who was a painter. He ran a painting company. My best friend, or one of my best friends at the time, lived next door to me, and his dad ran a painting company. And so I would ride in with them every day at like 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd go drive 2 hours to Goldsboro from Jacksonville, work all day, and then ride 2 hours back, go home and go to bed. Yeah, that was it. That was my whole life sometimes we had to get up at 4. We went out on most weekends too. So I was, working nonstop. And that was my, I worked at Burger King before that, but that was like, when I was in high school, that wasn't full time. So my first job was like much more full time than the average person. We were probably working 60, 70 hours a week. And I've kind of done that for most of my career. I've worked, I just taught tons. So I did that for about a year and a half, and ended up, I don't know, I just didn't care for it, but it was good money at the time. I get my license back, I get a car. I started working for a company called Professional Solutions LLC, which is the most generic business name ever. They did contracting for Marine Special Operations Command. So while that sounds very cool, in reality, my job was, I was basically a glorified janitor, but we were paid very, very well. And so we did support, and like I was a site coordinator. So we set up facilities and did janitorial stuff and some other actual fun stuff that I'm not supposed to talk about, for the Marine Corps Special Operations Command Assessment and Selection Program. So when they're picking dudes for MARSOC, which is like the Marine Corps equivalent of the Green Berets, effectively, right? Or what have you. I don't know if there are any operators out there listening to this, don't shoot me for that comparison. So apologies to you, but everyone else, you can pretend like that's sufficient. And so that was pretty great. I did that for a while. It was like a month at a time. So I did that, and then I came back and I got a job building fences. And then I was also working at a movie store at the time, which was one of the best jobs I ever had. I really loved that. So I was working at the movie store, in between periods at in Virginia, working at APL, and I started. That was my first experience with sales, right? And I kind of resolved, because my dad was like a special operations Marine. He did, he was a sniper, and then he was in recon, and then he was in Det 1, and then he was in MARSOC, and now he's deputy director of the MARSOC school. Like, so he's just a hardcore badass dude. And I thought about going to the military for a while, but I kind of resolved that I was like, well, I'm never going to be able to beat my dad at his own game. So if I'm going to surpass him, I have to beat him at something he wasn't good at. And like, my dad's good at all kinds of shit. He's very, very talented dude. But he's not a people person at all. And I'm not by nature either, but I resolved that I was gonna, that was the thing. I was like, all right, I could definitely beat him at that because he's put no effort into it. And it's not his thing, right? So I saw sales as a way to get into that, right? Because that was my weakness, because I am very much an introvert. I'm very much a reclusive kind of bookworm person. And it may not seem that way for me now, but like that's where I come from, right? And so I don't know, I had a very wonderful manager, Miss Julie, who like was very much pushed me. She was hardcore. And I started doing sales, selling magazine subscriptions and some other fun, like coupon cards and stuff like that. And I ended up being like number 3 in the region. So like out of multiple states. And I was like, all right, I pretty much got this as much as I think I can get it. Now what? And so there was a hair straightener kiosk outside of the movie store at the mall that I worked at. And I went out to go smoke a cigarette with the guy who ran the kiosk. And he was like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I sell stuff at the movie store. He's like, you do sales? I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, what do you do? It's like, oh, I sell hair straighteners. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's like, you want to do it? And so I was like, no. But I went home and thought about it. And I told my parents, it's like, hey, the guy at the hair straightener kiosk in the mall gave me a job. And they like laughed at me. They're like, you're an idiot. That's stupid. I was like, I'm going to do it. So I did. And at this point I was working for, there was a part of, because most of the time I spent doing the contracting was in Virginia. But before, in the earlier stages, we were down at Stone Bay. So I would wake up like at somebody's house, because we partied all the time, at like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, drive down to Stone Bay, wake up, go do whatever, like stand in the woods and click a counter while I'm counting dudes running by at 4 o'clock in the morning on some kind of like 2-hour long run. And then I would like go drive into town at like 8, go work at the movie store for a couple hours, get off at like 1 or 3 or something. I would go change clothes, go and work on the hair straightener kiosk and start learning how to sell hair straighteners. I was nuts. That was probably the most I ever worked until recently, because I currently do have somewhere between a fluctuating number of jobs higher than 2. And so I don't know. So it was weird. It was very weird at first. All the people that run those kiosks in the malls are generally Israelis. It's actually different. Pretty much every mall has a collection of immigrants in them that do different things. So the Israelis run the high pressure kiosks almost all the time. And then you have like the Indian dudes and Pakistani dudes that run like the gold kiosk, or like the passive kiosk, if you want to call them that, not the active sales kiosk. And so I don't know. So it's just like, that's an interesting fact about malls. It's pretty much seems to be true everywhere. I have no idea why that's the case, but it seems to be the case. So I don't know. So the Israelis called me Gingy. They're like, oh, Gingy, yada. I started learning how to do it. I really wasn't that good because I'm not that pushy of a salesperson, but I kind of eventually got decent enough at it. And I remember this is like a defining moment of my life. I remember getting, after the best week I had, this envelope with some Hebrew written on it, just like a blank envelope with like $2,200 in cash. And I had never ever seen this much money in my life. You know, it was like especially in cash in my hands that I earned. I was like, this is awesome. So for the next 2 weeks, I would wake up at someone's house and drive to the mall and buy new clothes and eat out for every meal. We'd go out and party every night. I did this every single day, and I still didn't run out of money at the end of the 2 weeks. I was like, after this, I was like, I really don't care that much about money anymore, which is a bad thing because now I'm not very motivated financially. So that comes with a host of other problems. But eventually, I don't know, I did that for like 6 months. I was getting kind of fed up with that. And also a lot of like, I was partying in town, and Jacksonville, North Carolina is kind of a terrible place. And so I was like, all right, I need to get out of town. I'm going to go to school because that was the only way I could think of to get out. So I go to NC State. I made a deal. I was like, all right, if I get into school, I'm never doing sales again. And so I got into school for business or marketing, into Poole College of Management. While I was in school, I think I forgot one job. I was a roofing inspector for 3 days somewhere in that part. I don't remember when, but yes. Anyway, while I was in school, the first semester I kind of I tried, and it was interesting. The second semester I really wasn't feeling it. I even was taking more interesting classes, but I have serious problems with the educational system. I really don't care for it. And by the third semester, I think my second semester, I got like 66.7. So I was like 0.1 above failing. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to ride it out and have a good time. And right before I was going to fail out in my third semester, it was like a week before the end of the semester. And it was like exams are coming up. And at this point, I was done. I didn't really have that much of a plan. My only plan was I was going to write Robert Allison, who's the former CEO of BB&T, who when they came with the bank bailouts, he refused to take them. I always thought that was very cool, during the financial crisis, and he stepped down. So I figured I was going to write him a letter like, hey man, I'm in this debt, but I'll literally be like your indentured servant if you'll like pay off my debt. I'll shine your shoes or something. And that was my plan. It wasn't a good plan. But so like a week before exams come, before school's over, and then I'm asked out, my buddy hits me up, one of my buddies from the kiosk, and he was like, hey, you want to start a business? I was like, yes, I do. So perfect. It's another one of those synchronicities, So I end up going the week of exams. I drive up to New York with him, and we meet up with another friend of mine, and we hash out this business, which is Freedom Way Waste Valet, or what would have been our first startup. So initially, I was actually not brought in as a C-suite level person. I was just going to do all the work because they're both very lazy. And so we ended up losing one of the two very early on because he didn't do anything. And then I kind of like worked my way up as far as I did a bunch of stuff, and then I built the website, and that's how I got into building websites. And then I did the brand, which is how I got into doing brands. And then I wrote all the copies, so I know a little bit of that. And we were pitching all the time and doing all this. And so we did it for about a year. I was living in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and it was cool. That was probably one of the coolest times ever. We got to make all kinds. I built like the big banners, and we did a coat drive, and we had these little like dollhouse size trash cans that we filled up with candy and business cards, and I put our logo on and delivered to some of the people that we were pitching to. We went all out with it. It was nuts because we were just trying to think of different ways to make it work, and we redid the business plan all the time. But after a year of this, we just, we were done. We were done. Nobody was particularly passionate about, multifamily housing, valet trash services, as I can't imagine many people are. So it was hard to keep pushing with very little, like basically no positive feedback for any longer than that. So at that point, my buddy went on vacation and I was back working in Virginia at the time. And he gives me a call and he's like, "Hey, you want to move to Colorado?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So it's like a year after he was like, "Hey, you want to start a business?" He just gives me another random call. It's like, "Hey, you want to uproot your life completely?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." This is kind of where the direction that things have gone is, it's like, I have no idea what's going on anymore, but I'm down for the insanity, so we go to Colorado. I get a job working in a microchip factory. I'm also, in this point, I was briefly homeless for a little while, because he was trying to buy a house, and then we were staying somewhere, but it took longer. And then I was out living under a rock on a mountain in Colorado, in Colorado Springs for a couple of days. But then we ended up moving into a motel for like a month, and then we ended up living with also a Mormon or ex-Mormon couple. They moved into the hotel room with us, and the guy who ran the motel knew that we had extra people in there, but he couldn't prove it. So we were like,
"Oh my!"
It was
just getting crazier.
It just gets crazier. Yeah, no. So we did that, and then he finally gets his place. But I had kind of resolved at this point that I really, really, really didn't want to be dependent on anyone. Me and my business partner at the time, we had some issues, and I was, coming out of college, I was kind of a mooch, and I really wasn't taking responsibility for stuff. So this is when I decided I was going to start really turning things around. It's around somewhere in that time is when I did the first, like, the 40-day fast.
Yeah.
And then while I was living in the hotel room, I call up a buddy of mine, Arda from college, Arda Cole, who's got several North Carolina state powerlifting records, or at least he did for a while. He's a big dude. Yeah. And I was talking to him. I was like, "Man, I really need to start writing because I have these books that I want to write in the future, and I need to start practicing." And he's like, "Oh yeah, man, I'm thinking about doing I would do like a weightlifting blog and stuff." It's like, well, what if we just combined it and it would be like a self-improvement thing? Because I really just wanted to write about philosophy and stuff.
Sure.
And then we get the website. We had Master Self. And so we talked about doing it a lot of the time. Like, I started writing when I was living in the hotel room. Then I was working at the microchip factory doing night shifts, and that was no fun. So I didn't really start writing officially until I moved to Reno. And basically, the reason why I moved to Reno, when I was at work at the microchip factory, my trainer, the guy who was teaching me how to run a microchip furnace, was like, "Why are you here? You're young. You could go to Tesla and do similar factory kind of work and get paid way more." I was like, "All right." I applied. I got it. Flew out to Reno, got a job there, on the spot, which is cool. And basically realized the only way that I was going to be able to go there, because I was still pretty broke. I was a factory worker, I wasn't making that good of money. The only way I was going to be able to make it out there where I had guaranteed income, I was going to get a raise, was to go live in a tent. So, because I had never been to Reno, I don't know anyone in Reno. It was as far away from home as possible, basically, on, like home in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And so I resolved to go live in a tent. At this point, I had started building a team for Master Self. So I was finding people who wanted to write, and we were doing a podcast, which is how I got into podcasting. Although, if you ever, I hope they don't exist anymore. All the original Master Self podcasts are very, very bad. They're just terrible. There was just bad podcasts. But this is years ago. So it was like before podcasting became everyone has a podcast. So we had a team of people, and we were doing that. And I'm living in this tent. It's like basically the first night I get out there, I was trying to find somewhere to stay. So the state of Nevada, this is a fun fact, is approximately 66 or 67% BLM land, which is Bureau of Land Management land, meaning you can live on it for brief periods of time, meaning not more than 14 days if you get caught. I, of course, did not get caught. So I found a spot. It was like 10 minutes away from work and 10 minutes away from town, off the highway, out in the middle of nowhere. It was great. My tent got destroyed a couple times because of the weather. It was very cold. It was like November. So it's like 20 degrees. It was very windy in the desert too, because it's the high desert. It's like 7,000 feet. So, so I just kept waking up in the middle of the night and just having my tent like smack me in the face. Like the roof's ripped off.
Oh man.
Oh yeah, that happened 2 times. Then I don't know. I did that for a month. I was kind of done. Working at Tesla. That was great. That was a great time. There's they very good hiring, very good everything except their middle management is filled with psychopaths. And I think that must be a universal, but everyone else is cool. So I had a good time. During this time, I tried up until, the first like 6 months of the blog, I tried having a team and nobody really was as motivated to write as me. And eventually it ended up just being me and my friend Tia ran the Instagram for a while, which was very much appreciated. But then it kind of, I don't know, once everyone else was off the team, I really got more motivated to write. So I wrote a ton. And after about a year of that, I started getting into Twitter. And then I started this Twitter company where they were, Ion Media, we wrote a book as a group. And then I realized, it's kind of easy to do this Kindle publishing stuff. So I published one of my, a year of my stuff as my first book. I wrote some more. We put on this big, we had a newsletter and a bunch of podcasts and all kinds of stuff going on. And we put on a conference at the end of 2019 that was very, very cool. But there was some chaos associated with the Twitter universe that kind of led to the downfall of my company. And this is also after I had just moved back to Raleigh in June of 2019 and kind of, I published my second book. And then I kind of decided to focus more on like different stuff, less online stuff, right? So the reason that I moved back to North Carolina is because I came back to visit for the first time in like 3 years, and Sonny happened to be in town. I knew Sonny from college. We're in the same fraternity, and we had just had a chance meet up and started talking about this thing that he wanted to do. He was like, oh yeah, what if you had this like co-working space and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, well, what if you had like a co-living space, blah, 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 blah. And we were like, let's do it. Let's work on it. So I came back to work on that. I get here. I had no money. I had to sell all my Tesla stock to survive, which is a sad point in the story because this is when the Tesla stock before the split was worth like $200. Which is the worst because I would have been rolling in the dough if I had kept. I had a bunch of Tesla stock from working there, and they just gave it out like candy at work. It was awesome. So that happens. I end up getting a job. Oh yeah, I mean it's stock.
So we just call that water under the bridge, and only cry when there's beer about.
So I get back and I was trying to find a job. I almost got a bartending gig because I've served before. I really enjoy serving. I was going to be fine with that. And I was freelancing on the side doing graphic design and stuff like that. And Sonny ends up getting me a job with this dude, Patrick Corwin. His actual name is Patrick Vivian. He's a Canadian dude who's a con artist. We didn't know this at the time, right? So I am hired as the executive vice president. I should have realized early on, but this is the first. I don't know. I've done some other startups and stuff in the middle there that I kind of left out because they're not as interesting. But this is the first one where it was like, oh, they have funding and stuff, and they're gonna do okay, cool, right? He's claimed to have funding. He didn't have any funding. He would just go and like get these offices and then not pay for them. And then we would just get kicked out of them. We'd go to different offices. So we did, I don't know, it was a couple months we did this. I didn't get paid for a long time. And the problem was that I was in charge of hiring all these people and training all these people and doing all this stuff. So which I'm good at, I've done before. So I like built a team. I don't know if you've met Victor Valentine, but Victor is, okay. He's also from the same part of Twitter as John and I, in that same group of people. He was in my other company. So I tell Vic, hey, he's going to pay you, fly out from California to come work with us. I know, right? So Vic really got screwed over in that regard. We come out and eventually there was some money, and we found out later that he got that money from people that shouldn't have been loaning him that money, but that it was because he just would like smooth talk his way through all kinds of stuff. So Moral of the story, we all ended up, I quit, they all quit, and we basically reformed later as a different company. That company was called Old North Mark. We became Remark as
Right.
like,
Right.
but with a Q. That was a mark with a Q. And that was actually going to be really cool. We unfortunately started that company exactly 2 weeks before COVID and the
Oh,
quarantine began. So if we had done it in a different time, probably would have been awesome. Of course, you know, we were working out of like a not a restaurant. They have like this convenience store, or not a convenience store, like a grocery store downtown with a co-working space in it upstairs. We were working out of there, and then you couldn't work anywhere. And then we went and worked out of our friend Tim's kitchen for a while. Tim's one of the people who'd been victimized by Patrick. You actually, to the viewer at home, you can look up Patrick Corwin fraud or Patrick Vivian fraud Canada. He will pop up. There's lots of fraud reports written about him as a fun aside.
huh.
So at this point, I was getting kind of burned out because it was just like, man, it's like thing after thing after thing, just not going right. And I moved back to work on all this stuff, and it just really wasn't happening. But eventually, I started working at Paradigm in April or May of last year. Paradigm is Sonny's company, which I believe Sonny has been on the show. To viewers, you'll know him. And I started originally, well, I had actually done some stuff when he had some other people that worked there. I wrote copy for Paradigm a long time ago, and I helped them put on, my company, I Media, helped them put on a event. We handled the live streaming for it. And in conjunction with Oak City Productions, they handled like the filming, and I just did the streaming and the restreaming stuff.
Mhm.
But so I started, and originally Sonny hired me to do a deck of tarot cards that were affectionately called the Garrow cards. That was going to be like customized as a product that we could sell. And I was like, started working on it. I was like, yeah, you actually don't want me to do this. So I started just working on other stuff, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna try and sort out all these business things, because there's a lot of stuff here that really needs to be like tweaked. So I started doing that, and we had at the time, it was me and Sam Hebda, who you know, and Sarah Boone was the lead designer. And we did that for a while, and we started the Vortex, which is a online business community built out of Discord that we run. And just, I don't know, we've been doing that. And John moved out to live with us, John Giuffre, who I believe has also been on here. And that's kind of how we got where we are, I guess.
Don't try to follow those footsteps, kids. That's tough. And it's like,
I would not
that is
recommend it.
busy.
Yeah,
It's a lot of chaos. It's like
pure chaos. It's been
juggling,
insane.
a lot of juggling going on. It's unsettling. It's because it's so much just kind of randomness.
Which is weird, because I myself am a fairly like orderly person. So it's just strange, because the like, especially when I was like before college, when I was getting into crazy stuff, it was like there are a lot of people I've met where it's like, okay, it makes sense that they're involved in this stuff, but for me, like, I always felt very out of place, and people are like, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. So it's just weird. It's been a very weird ride, to say the
So
least.
the question I would have would be, in do you say you don't quite know what turn it's going to take in 6 months or something like that? Do you have a plan? You know what I mean?
I actually have a briefcase full of plans that I have for different like businesses and things that I want to do. My whole thing is kind of like when I play chess, I don't like, you don't plan chess to the end. You kind of learn, okay, what are some good places I could put my pieces in the beginning, and how do I kind of maneuver them in the mid game, and then you just kind of learn how to wing it in the end game, because it's
Right.
not like, you can't really plan that far ahead. And
Right.
so my whole thing is like, all right, I have this folder full of things that I guarantee definitely will make money. I know they're good. I just don't have the resources to do them yet. So it's kind of been like, all right, how do I minimize my living expenses? Right. So I try to own very little stuff. I try to, not get tied into leases or whatever, so that I can stay flexible and that kind of stuff, because that's going to help me cut the costs until I can get to the point where everything's sustainable. So right now, I don't know, there's a couple things that I've got going on. Um, my main goal, I'm working on an app. I'm developing an app. We're in the early stages, so it's not development yet, but called Gravity. That's going to be a social media alternative that probably be closer to Discord plus Twitter than it would be to Facebook. But that's one of my plans. I have a variety of other business plans, especially me and John like to scheme all the time. Sonny and I scheme about stuff. Realistically, what I'd like to do, I guess, is the the things that I really legitimately care about are philosophical problems or large scale social problems that I really don't think people are good at understanding the root causes of and thus cannot solve.
Mm.
So if you look at like what something I'm very passionate about is like social media is so bad for people, right? You could look at the rates of mental health problems that
Oh
stem
yeah.
from like 2008.
Oh
It's I just recently saw another bizarre but interesting graph that was like the percentage of male virgins in the population
yeah.
tripled in 2008 from 2008 to now, which is bizarre until you look at all those graphs together. And it's like, well, very clearly, like cell phones and social media are terrible, right? So that's something I'm pretty passionate about. I'm very much passionate about like community building and how do we how do we get back to a more natural state of human life, social life, community life, stuff like that. I think the way, you know, what Sunny and I, when I moved out here to work on Sunny with was we called it Nova, which is like an initiative towards changing the way we build housing in communities to be closer to what, you know, a hunter gatherer kind of thing would have been like. So building them around central communal areas, sharing more of the stuff, you know, not if you have an apartment complex, you have like 400 people crammed into a building, you don't need 400 microwaves in reality, right? Nobody's microwaving all day. You're never going to use all 400 at the same time. So you could probably cut the price of living if you made all the appliances communal or something like that. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like that. But if you look at like apartments are bad for people's mental health, that kind of, I guess that's kind of the stuff is like people system problems, not just like people problems, not like a therapist and not like just system problems like an engineer, but people
No,
systems. That's
I
kind
get
of my
you.
thing.
I get you. The interesting function of it is I was driving my wife lost her keys and I needed to drive down to Phoenix and help her out. And I'm driving through there and it's like all this suburbia, you know, it's like too many cars, too much, it's all designed around cars and it just made me ill. I'm like, this is just like, oh, be 80 years of intentionally bad development for somebody else's interests to be satisfied, which is the people who own the car companies and the gas companies and the real estate guys. And it's like, just, it's a malinvestment. And I'm like, wow, that is, and it's like this, the kicker is they have control of the political apparatus so that if you want to build your hunter gatherer, you know, idealized community, it's like, oh, you're not zoned for that, man. And it's very disturbing. But it's like,
It
okay,
is.
I don't see, unless you choose to apply yourself to solving such problems or even articulate the problem in a public way, it won't ever get fixed. So you have to
No,
grab
and
the
that's
egg.
people pick the wrong part, you know, people pick the wrong part of it to solve. So you could look at like, for example, one of the big things that there's like, and we don't need to get into whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. People, the viewer, I'll let the viewers draw their own conclusions. But for example, you have like the fat acceptance movement or healthy at any size, that kind of stuff, which is a response to the decreasing or increasing levels of obesity and stuff. So you could try and solve that problem by saying, oh, people are being treated badly, so we should change the way that people treat people. We could change that problem by saying, oh, well, people should diet or exercise more, right? Or you could look at all the way at the end of that, which is like, well, what are the root causes? Why are people sedentary? Why are they eating this high fructose corn syrup shit? What does a natural diet look like, and how far away are we from that being the norm? Because that's how I try to look at problems. It's like, what is the root cause? What does nature say? What would we be doing a million years ago? Because that is a consistent, that's a consistent thing to look at as a reference,
Right.
you know, because
Reference
people
baseline.
evolved. You know, we have like 3 million years of hunting and gathering. That's consistent. That's a sustainable thing. So while we also need to experiment, and I love having air conditioning for one, right? I'm not a Luddite by any means. We do need to look at, hey, what are these old things are natural and necessary for mental health and physical health and community health and all that kind of stuff. And how do we balance the two out, you know? Because I think that's I think that's what I think uniquely about, or at least what I don't see a lot of other people doing that I try to do, is look at really, really big systemic problems from like a first principles perspective. And most people either look at big systemic problems or they pick small things and go first principles with them, but it's like the people system problems. And I really don't see many people addressing correctly as far as I see it.
It's a difficult one. And it is a philosophical angle on it, I think, is because it is, how do you integrate the microscopic and the macroscopic elements of being a human being all at the same time? It's tough, man.
As above, so below, right?
That's right. One of the things I was talking to James Connors about was I'm trying to develop with him, and he agreed to do it. We haven't started yet, is to develop linguistic tools to talk about what he calls ecological psychology, which is it's on a human scale. But I want to make this conversation be scalable across all scales of existence. So from subatomic to cosmic scales, about the interaction between the thing and the environment in which it sits. So we could look at the human being, or we could look at rock, or we could look at, say, a group of human beings, or all humanity in an evolutionary scale, and how those information is transduced to create the effects that we see. That's what I'm interested in doing, because it's like, I think that will be useful for this conversation because it is difficult to make that scaling function in a operational sense. Like, because what am I going to do about it, right? That's the ultimate question.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot, is if you think, first off, I guess this is one of my central premises that I consider to be somewhat unique in a sense. I guess I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, is I really don't think it's supposed to be this hard to live in the world. I really don't think it is. Which is a bit of a that's kind of a crazy thought if you think about it.
How old is right now? How old are you right now?
26.
Okay, so like when I was about 25, I'm driving across the country and I'm like, you can't stop anywhere unless you're paying somebody. It's like, whoa, that's not right. That's just not right. It's like, that seems obtuse, and I didn't like it. And it disturbed me a great deal, so I kept on driving, right? It's like, but it's like you can't rest your bones anywhere unless you're paying rent. And it's like, okay, that's the way it goes. And it's like, it does seem like it's excessively difficult.
Because this is the thing that people look back and they're like, hunter-gathering times would have been really hard and shit. It'd be terrible. You know how easy it is to hunt big animals? Like, we're so good at hunting megafauna that they're all extinct. Like, we killed all of them. It's not even hard. Like, what people don't understand, pack hunting with like the ability to communicate, where you can tell, like, hey, we have a spear and we're going to go hunt that big thing that doesn't have any natural predators, and we can communicate and trick it. It's like so effective. It's not even funny. It's so easy that you just killed all of them. We just killed all the megafauna, right? And so they said the average hunter-gatherer person worked an average of 3 hours a day, right? And so imagine you go like run around for 3 hours, you stab a big old thing, and then you just get to eat like the best meat in the world. Is this free range, grass-fed, grass-finished, like bison or like a woolly mammoth. Can you imagine how good woolly mammoth must have tasted? Like this big, giant, fatty animal. Oh my God. So when you think about that, it's like, okay, so you guys literally just hung out all day. You pretty much just like ate and then made like pottery, or you did some art and danced and played some music or whatever, sang songs. It's like, everybody was having a great time, you know, for by and large. The average lifespan was the same. So, you know, other than infant mortality is much higher, but that's like
Right.
a recent thing that we're starting to solve because of big ass heads. But realistically, you were going to have an awesome time. You're probably going to do some mushrooms and talk to the ancestors. It was great, right? Everyone had a great time. We got so far away from that. We think it's progress. If you look at like, transmissible diseases are largely related to like the kind of diseases that we have. So many of them come from farm animals, right? like plagues and stuff. You know, cow pox, chicken pox, smallpox. And yeah, all these come from like domesticating animals, which is something we didn't have to do when we were hunting the megafauna, but we hunted them too well, right? Which is actually, that's a uniquely human problem, is that we take more than we need. Whereas like a wolf doesn't, you know, wolf's not going to go kill all your sheep. He's going to go kill a sheep and eat your sheep. He's not going to, you know, he's not going to genocide your sheep, right? So it's weird because it's like we're not evolved for this nonsense. It's not, nobody's evolved to get cyberbullied on Instagram, right? It's a novel thing. You're not good at that. And it kills people. It like regular bullying, yeah, you can do it. It's not that bad. Cyberbullying, nope. There's some kind of like dysregulation of like normal empathy stuff that limits how cruel you're going to be. It's way worse. It's dramatically worse. It's bad.
I know,
it's bad.
The interesting function of that appears to be the intentional engineering of the social media to act in a manner that is similar to addictive substances. It's designed to be that way. And so it's like this. It's like the thing that addicts you also like desensitizes you to the humanity on the other side of the wire. And it's makes them more, it's they're addicted to the thing that has turned the ultimate sour to them, right? It's just awful. There's definitely much work to be done to solve problems that are related to that whole business. We are in a difficult state here, just transitioning to this digital paradigm.
Yeah, it's problematic because the incentive structures of society are so bad, right? They're so very far against. I like to say, you know, if somebody's incentive structure involves their, if somebody's getting paid to do something bad, they're never going to stop doing it, right? For example, like, right, I would bet good money that it's very unlikely that anyone on the board of Philip Morris smokes, right? It's very unlikely that anyone who runs Philip Morris, which is a cigarette company, right, or a tobacco company, it's very unlikely they smoke. It's very unlikely that anyone on the board of McDonald's eats McDonald's more than as a token thing occasionally, right? And probably not at all. It's very unlikely that the people on the board of Coke drink Coke every day, right? And so you have these big companies where it's obviously they know better than to use their own products on a daily basis, right? But they're totally okay with other people doing that, right? Can you imagine what kind of mental gymnastics you have to go through to be on the board of Philip Morris and be like, live with yourself at all, to know you're making poison? Because, you know, it's the problem is people think it's like, oh, well, it's about personal responsibility, moderation. It's like, you're making addictive shit, man. You're making things that are, you know, that is it the fault of heroin addicts who are addicted to heroin, or do we decide, hey, actually, if we go shoot the heroin dealer, there's not going to be any more heroin in town, right? That's what. How far do we take our responsibility for that? Because it's like, at a certain point, it's not, you can't just blame the victim or the person who's now addicted to this thing, especially with social media where they designed it to be that way, right? It's like fentanyl. It's like fentanyl is designed to be more addictive than heroin, right? It's super heroin, and it kills you at the time. So
I kind of reject that. It's like the issue with the street drugs versus the pharmaceutical drugs, right? Because it was all oxycodone and narcotics that were manufactured. And then they squeezed the living hell out of the doctors and the patients, and they pretty much pushed everybody onto the street. And it's like, okay, the problem with the street drugs compared to the pharmaceuticals that are manufactured is we have quality control. even if it is
Mhm.
manufacturing the same poison. At least it's predictable poison. And the thing that kills you with when you're taking street drugs is, oh, it's a little bit more pure than you anticipated, and you're done.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's all very predictable. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I will comment anymore on that. It's just, it's reprehensible. I think that we would do better with a regulated marketplace if you're going to allow it. You know what I mean? I just think it's better.
Oh yeah, yeah. Legalize it, decriminalize it. I personally think that's the case, and I think we should shift away from criminality to treatment, simply because you look at like countries that have done that, like Chile has done that, and their overall usage rates drop significantly. Their recidivism rates drop significantly. People are doing way better. It's like if you look at addiction as what it is, which is ultimately a symptom of a mental illness or some kind of societal dysregulation in which you don't fit into society, what do? Throw them in a box and forget about them and let them?
Right.
We got to treat
Portugal did this.
Maybe it's Portugal. Yeah, it was some South American country.
Portugal's.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. You know,
Spain, man, come on.
Oh, so it's more than just that. No,
it's
I was
okay.
thinking Portuguese. With
I know. I just that was for the audience, man. It wasn't to punch you in the.
It's also Chile did that as well. I know it was some one of the larger South American countries did, and it was very successful.
It's very interesting. So it's like when you have I don't know, it's asking a lot. I think you have to allow communities to exclude certain practices that are objectionable to them on some moral basis. You know what I mean? Because it's like they have a firmly founded moral belief that doesn't work and that's problematic. We don't want that to be in our neighborhood. That they get to exclude it. You know?
So yeah, I agree. One of the big things I'm very big on that's something that Nicholas Nassim Taleb has commented on is he has this concept of fractal localism, which is effectively the opposite of what we have now, where right now we have some ostensibly global powers that have influence above that of federal governments, and then you have federal governments that have enormous amounts of influence on state governments, which have very little power, and there are local governments who basically get nothing, and then you have the individual in the household who is SOL, right?
Oh yeah.
Flip it. So the idea of fractal localism is that the end unit, right? You should have perfect sovereignty over yourself. You should have high levels of sovereignty over your household and your local community. I personally think everyone should have like town councils or like village elders or something like that. I think that's cool and it sounds cool. So I like the aesthetic. For aesthetic reasons, I like that. Everyone gets like a robe and they go sit in a circle and I don't know, but and then you'd have your city or your township, and then your city, then the state, and then the federal government would have limited power. And then if there's some kind of global thing, it'd be very, very weak. But however, there are certain issues that you can only deal with at scale. Like, do I think that every individual human being should have a nuclear weapon? No, probably not. Are nuclear weapons a useful large-scale land conflict deterrent? It seems to be so, right? So probably not getting rid of nukes. And we probably shouldn't have them on the lowest level. So maybe leave that at the top and prevent the land conflicts, But I like that idea because it puts more of the power back on you and your community.
So this brings me to a question that I would have for you, which is this related to etymological phenomena that I just discovered recently, which is about 1650 or so, the term consciousness was created, okay? Which is made of two roots with knowledge, okay? And I don't know the roots right off the top of my head. One is calm and the other is like, I couldn't tell you.
Scientia is knowledge. So the Marsac schoolhouse, Victoria per Scientia is victory through knowledge. Or through understanding.
So that's 1600. So about 200 years prior to that, the word science came out, which is related to the same basic thing, which is how do we find knowledge? But 200 years before that, the same root words, conscientia or conscientia, was articulated as conscientiousness. So knowledge of good and evil, awareness of right and wrong. So there's like, you see this, what has happened in the 1200, they invent that one, which is awareness of right and wrong as part of my, well, what later became stripped of morality and is now mere consciousness, absent morality. And science is the way it operates without moral basis or moral foundation. It's like, I think that's the problem. So I'm like this, I'm asking people, and I'm going to start asking them on my podcast, and you're the first one. It's like this. It seems like there's a lot of people talking about wisdom. Okay. And that's how it goes to your village elders, right? Wisdom. What is wisdom? How do we define wisdom? And how do we articulate what is wisdom and who's wise? And how do we know who's wise? Is there a way we can do that in a systematic manner?
Yeah. Okay. So I have so much to say on this topic. So bear with me. I'm going to revisit that question because you said some stuff before that will lead into that.
Sure.
Okay. So my big, there's two ways we could look at this. I'll give you the big picture one, and then I'll give you the small picture one. Now, small picture first, it'll make more sense. My big complaint with most of modern society is I think the Enlightenment, everything that came out of the Enlightenment was inevitable, but ultimately a lot of the foundational thinking is a mistake and wrong. They got a lot of stuff wrong. So what I think happened is effectively first off, calling it the Enlightenment was pretentious as hell. It's the same thing. If you've ever met a person who's been enlightened, it's like, if you've ever met a person who's recently enlightened, it's like pretentious as hell. Yeah. Oh yeah, man, I did some acid at a Grateful Dead concert, and I understand, like, you guys aren't ready for all this stuff. No, it's not that cool. Enlightenment, I personally don't think enlightenment, like in the Buddhist kind of Eastern sense, is even a big deal. I think it's a thing that you got to do, but I think it's like not. There's a quote, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. During enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water, which is like, you're going to think this is really cool. It's not. You just need to keep doing your work.
Right.
So the point of this being, what I believe happened, what I think has been happening as a result of human society for a long time, you could trace this back even to the Greeks and perhaps further back. We've had the mind-body dichotomy split. And this splits rationality from emotions, right? This is also a physiological thing because the left brain has the Broca and the Wernicke's region, I believe, are the speaking parts of the brain, right?
Right.
The language centers. Those are only on one side of your brain. So if you ever did see like split brain experiments and stuff, the speaking part of the brain cannot communicate with the other one. And this part of the right part of the brain, the creative side, is where emotions and stuff kind of live, and they just don't communicate very well, and they do different things. So you have hemispheric lateralization of function, right? This, I think, is something I think like an individual's kind of neurology or physiology also projects onto the world in a sense. So if you look at like, and it's weird in that sense, but like East and West, Eastern and Western culture are kind of, more right brain, more left brain in a weird way. And so I won't get into why I think that is the case. It's interesting. I don't really have a rationale for it, but what we did effectively with the Enlightenment is we said, hey, you remember all those, like in the 1400s, you could point at the sky when it's raining and say, oh man, that lightning is because Thor is hitting his anvil, right? That's a kick-ass explanation, for the record. That's a cool explanation. There's some meaning behind that. You can draw a meaning out of that, even if it's not literally correct. It makes your life better. However, now, Benjamin Franklin is told you there's electricity because of charged particles in the air or some shit. And we gain a literal understanding, but we lose the why, right? And that's what the Enlightenment did. We got all of this knowledge and we lost the why. We lost the emotional component of it, which is basically, and this is effectively what I think we did, is we demonized the feminine, because the feminine ways of knowing and of interacting with the world, which is, intuition and emotion and the depths of creativity and stuff like that. That's something that we've said no longer has value based off of the Enlightenment. We said only things that we can logically, literally prove are true, and everything else is bullshit, right?
Left brain. Yeah.
Yep. What do we get? What do we get? We get a world of cubicles. We get soul crushing efficiency with no regard for the human. We get stupid ass truck stops everywhere in the country that look identical, and strip malls, right? And fast food restaurants. And it's just disgusting, and it's poison to the soul, right? We've killed the feminine, because the feminine is where we get zest for life, right? The that other sort of knowing, losing that is killing everyone, right? And people can't acknowledge it, because to acknowledge that is to understand that the world is not simply something that can be quantified and put into boxes, right? There's a deeper sort of knowledge or wisdom even that is not touchable with the rational mind, right?
That's right.
So for example,
It's
if you
beyond
notice,
beyond articulation.
yeah, it's an experience. It's the reality of the subjective nature of consciousness, right? The subjective experience itself cannot be quantified. And so that's where we get, you've probably noticed this, there are so many fucking scientists, there's so many of these guys trying to say consciousness is an illusion, we can't prove consciousness exists, is this a simulation we're living in, right? Why do we do that? Why are we trying to prove that? Because we can't measure subjective experience. And everyone who tries to deny the reality of the subjective experience creates horrible things, right? Behaviorism is terrible, right? The red pill as a psychological phenomenon is evolutionary psychology, which is pretty legit, combined with behaviorism, which is nightmare fuel, right? And it creates this disgusting, dehumanizing philosophy that demonizes the feminine, because that's how it always works, right? So as long as we deny emotions, the importance of emotions, the importance of this deep kind of thing, we're going to keep destroying everything. Because that, and it's ironic, because what we get, like if you look at feminism, feminism actually is a masculinized version of the female experience, right? It's like, oh well, we're gonna write it out like it's a logical argument and all that stuff, and it's like, oh, it's not. It's an emotional argument filtered in through this language, and you've taken out the soul of it. You've killed the feminine, right? In the pursuit of competing in this masculine field. And that's the problem. Like the complaints are valid. The way that the men are running this stuff, there's lots of problems with it, because they're also denying the necessity of the genuinely feminine, right? And that's the part we just don't get it. People can't relate to the subjective experience of, like the importance of love, because that's a subjective thing that makes the world make sense, right? If you don't have that, okay, well, everyone's out to get you, and family's not important, and all of these things, right? And so we have all these generations of people starved of these subjective emotions. They don't get to have love and belonging and meaningful shit, because we commoditize the world. And then you wonder why people rail against it, because they're railing against something they don't understand, and they can't understand it because it's subjective and you have to experience it.
Hell yeah.
So
yeah, that's a rant, man. It's right. It's right on the money, because it is. It's like it's a deracination. I regard it as like the unplugging of us from traditional moorings that work to keep everything working together, and us, functioning on this planet and making it go. And I regard it as an intentional function by people who were bullying everybody about because they gain benefit from doing so. That would be the psychopaths in, upper level suites of management, right? And it's like, and it's, well, what's that mean? Okay, I think you can't keep the genie in the bag. It's like it's going to get out of the lamp no matter how you slice it, because it's unavoidable, because it wants the human will figure a way out, because it's like it's this unbearable, and it looks like madness, because you're driving them mad, because it's like it will make you mad. You're working in the same cubicle every day, and it's like, what am I doing this for, right? And it's like, watching the hourglass drain away the time that is your life. It's like, this isn't madness, right? Like you're driving 4 hours to and from painting all day. Like, man, that is just, it's just hellish. People ask me, because they're like, oh, they're surprised I live in this little town I live in. It's 90-minute or at least an hour to the nearest suburban, oasis, I guess, because I'm in the mining district. And it's like, I'm too lazy to be driving 3 hours a day. I'm not going to do it. I'm not, because I drive 15 minutes to work, and I think that's excessive myself. Because when I envisioned being a physician, a country physician, I just wanted to get a building and work downstairs. I don't want to do any of that, man. I just want to just be a country doctor. I don't need to run around and be crazy and drive crazy cars.
And that used to work. You think about it, like, obviously the sophistication of the medical education was nowhere near what it is now. And yet doctors still were able to do their jobs, and you could go have house calls and have personal relationships with people. And guess what? They weren't bankrupted every single time anything happened, right? It's like, how much of that too with the medical field is us like denying the nature of reality? It's like, how many things, hey, maybe people just die. Maybe we don't need a $15 million surgery to figure out how to, bring this robot in.
What the trick is, as it has been done, is the public has abdicated their financial responsibility and handed it to insurance companies for the purpose of managing that liability and the assets. And they just ran the prices way up. And they made it
subsidized. They know it's subsidized.
Now the people have no money. So they don't have the responsibility for hiring their own doctors. So they don't even get to choose what they're doing. It's god awful, because the financial element of it is controlling the patients and the providers. And it's like they're overpaying the providers for the services they provide. And the people are all scared and having this crazy emotional response to having a problem. And they've heard some crazy thing and it cost $10 million and they don't know what that means. And it's like, they're not paying and they know it. And they're grateful for the opportunity to be the beneficiary of the largesse that is provided. And it's like, it's just an organizational mess is all it is. And it's benefiting the people who control the money, in my opinion. Right. And everybody else is serving their interests by, on one side of the equation or the other. It's rotten. It's rotten. And it's like the only way to rectify that is for the people to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. And it's nothing new.
And it's all preventative stuff. Like 90% of stuff that people go to the doctor for, if you just like ate species appropriate diet. I really like that phrase, by the way. That's the carnivore community came up with that. The species appropriate diet, because that's like, everyone gets that. It's like, oh yeah, well, dogs eat a species appropriate diet, and unless you're feeding your dog human food, they don't get fat. They don't get messed up, or like there's people that feed their cats vegan diets and the cats die all the time. It's like, why?
That's the first I've heard of that one.
It's freakishly, it's actually very, very sad, because people do it a lot and they think it's ethical, but they're killing their animals.
It's madness.
They'll like go blind and their fur falls out and they die. It's bad because they're predators. They need to eat meat, right? And guess what? So are we. And I can prove that with like tons and tons and tons of science. But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate because the way that we have everything set up is just, I like the last 100 years have been probably the greatest like series of just general misinformation or just widespread misunderstanding by the means of science. Like,
I think, abuse of the institutions to project bad information into the public for purposes that are not for the benefit of the public. How about that?
Oh yeah, look at food. Food is the one I'm so big about because I've watched just tons and tons and tons of food documentaries and stuff. Like before the Dust Bowl, we had this one kind of wheat that was totally fine, and I don't think it really was that bad for people. But during the Dust Bowl, the regular wheat was dying, so we combined the normal wheat with Japanese wheat, and it created this super wheat that. And then they started using before Roundup, what it was the DDT. During the Dust Bowl, and then we had this generation of people that was like hemophilic because of the DDT. They weren't before, and there's like a genetic component. Now the offspring are also hemophilic, and it's like, how much of this shit is stuff that we messed up in the last 100 years? How much? You can look at these numbers, like the diabetes, which was unheard. It's type 2 is the onset one, right? There were like 3 or 4 mentioned cases of type 2 diabetes in all of recorded history until we discovered sugar, like sugar cane in the 1500s or something. Like, it was a freak thing. It just is a nonsense freak thing. And now it's like one of the most common causes of illness, right?
Oh, it's a big industry.
Yeah.
And it's all eating the wrong food.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the thing. We can kind of, like, everyone understands these things, right? However, you can't, and this is the thing where I push back, and actually it's ironic that I do so, because my blog is called Master Self, and my, like, the tagline for the website is Master Yourself, Save the World, right? Or Save the World, Master Yourself, rather. There's a certain point where we cannot rely on the willpower and the self-reliance of the average person to fix these problems. You cannot do it, because, man, it's fucking hard. It's like, look, fasting. If you're talking about curing all this stuff, nobody needed to know how to, like, if you say you're 400 pounds, the only way, like, the fastest way you're going to lose 400 pounds, you can just not eat for 300 days, right? And your body's able to do that. But the amount of willpower required to do that, I know, like, one person in recorded history who's done that long of a fast. He did like 387 days or something like that, which is insane. It was medically supervised as well in the 70s. But like, the average person should not require infinite titanic amounts of willpower to live a healthy, normal life, right? We made it so hard, so difficult to live a healthy, normal life, right?
Right.
If you need to be able to resist infinite advertising. You're going to drive past temptation every second of every day, and these billboards and the radio ads are going to scream at you, basically without your consent, on your fucking phone, to your kids, magazines, on your computer. Every second of every day, people are trying to give you poison or whatever. It's insane.
No, they want to sell it to you. They're going to
sell. Yeah, they want to sell you poison. You're going to pay for this punishment, right?
Yes.
And so it should not be like this, right? It's wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong about this.
This is a moral argument. I like that.
This is more than a moral argument. It's a functional argument, right? It's like not the solution.
The should part is moral. That's how I look at should and shouldn't as a moral argument. That's a moral dimension.
Right. So I would say there are multiple components. So there's the moral argument, which is it shouldn't be like this. There's a functional argument, which is if we're going to fix it, it is not going to be fixed simply by having people develop immense amounts of willpower overnight. We right?
This would be the argument for the localism and moral governance. So political, which is is ultimately force. We can force the people who are bringing the toxins in to get out. Right, the pernicious influence will be removed from our community because we will force them to do so by police action.
I mean, yeah, that would be incredible if you could do it.
We could do it.
It's like, look, it's the same thing as, like, if you have a neighborhood where a drug dealer shows up, right? You have a nice neighborhood. I'm sorry, but you can either wait for the cops to fix it, or you can say, hey, I really don't want this guy selling crack to my kids or my neighbor's kids.
A story. I'm going to tell you a story. I ran into a patient, young guy. And his brother was he lived in California, and he was motocross. He was made of money doing that. He was getting money from it.
Are you busy?
I am, and he said he got tied up. He was getting methamphetamines or something. And so this guy, he just went to every dealer that he knew in town. He says, "If you sell my brother stuff, I will kill you. Any questions?" And it was like, nobody's going to sell him any stuff anymore. And it's like, okay, I don't know how well that works because I haven't seen him for many years. And it's like, but it is, I don't know what else you can do. Because it's like, to depend on I have another fellow that complains of it. There's a guy that's doing this next door to him in my town. And it's like, they're selling the stuff. And it's like, the police are like just observing. And I don't know, watching the comings and goings for their own purposes, right? To get bigger fish, maybe, who knows? It's like, so it's like there are wheels turning that don't make sense, right? It's like, it doesn't make sense. How do you resolve the problem in your backyard, right? And
that's because ultimately one of the things that I've discovered in the kind of my personal journey, which I detailed a bit of, but I didn't really get into like the psychological parts of that. That's an entirely different topic. But out of the blog is there is a finite, there's a point in the journey of like self-improvement, self-mastery where your capacity to do, if you want to pull like a Jordan Peterson thing, he's like, well, you increase the amount of order that you can maintain until it starts to encompass other people, bucko. But like there's a certain point where in the process of self-improvement, self-mastery, you actually have to start taking responsibility for the people around you.
That's right.
Right. And obviously, I personally think from a moral or philosophical perspective, everyone should internalize the notion that everything in the world is my fault and everything in the world is my job to solve. Right. Or at least that's the goal to strive towards. It's impossible to do that all the time. Right. Or even but if you look at that as that's the moral ideal, is how can I take responsibility for the problem, every single problem in the world, and act from that position, you're moving in the right direction. And that means that it's not just, at a certain point, it's not just you. Like one of the things for me, I quit drinking because I realized, oh, it's not just about me drinking, it's about the example that I'm setting for other people when I drink, that I'm setting them up to if other people do bad stuff because they're drinking, I'm making it harder for them to, or easier for them to do that, right? Or stuff like that. In that vein is like that's actually why I got this tattoo, which is the sword of Damocles. As basically, yeah. So for the viewer, there's a story, a Greek story, I believe, where there's a king and he's got all these concubines and they're feasting and they're having a good time. And this young guy, Damocles, runs up. He's like, why do you get all this nice stuff? I want some nice stuff. And the king's like, oh, cool, sure, let's do it. Let's you can be king for a day and see how you like it. He's like, oh, great, all right, I deserve it. So next day shows up and he gets all this food and all the concubines. He's having a good time. But the king is like, actually, here's the catch. I'm gonna tie up the sword hanging from a horsehair above the throne where only you can see it. And while you have all this fun, you're just going to know that at any moment that string could break and the sword will kill you instantly, right? And so Damocles gets really uncomfortable. Eventually he runs away in terror, right? Because he can't handle that. And so the notion of that, why I like that story is leadership is not a reward, it's a punishment. But it's a necessary one. You have to be able to like accept that other people rely on you and you have to take responsibility for them. And that's very, very important. Right. And so with self-improvement, that at a certain point, you do realize like, it's not enough. Like, yes, in a perfect world, every single person would self-improve to the point that they could be 100% responsible all of the time. Right. I can't do that.
Nobody.
I don't know anyone who can. It's not happening, right? However, there are some people who are never going to be able to even achieve a functional level of responsibility, right? It's just not likely to happen. And we can say, well, oh, it's their job to do that. And it is. It doesn't matter, because if it's not going to happen, we still have to take responsibility for that and act accordingly. And that's ultimately what I think leadership is like, there's a story in Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, where he talks about this sea captain in the late early 1900s. They go on this expedition to the Arctic or wherever, and they get snowed in and their boat gets frozen in the Arctic over the winter. And so it's like dark for months, right? There's like barely any daylight because they're up north and it's freezing. And so they talk about why they survived, because they survived. It's like 6 or 9 months of just winter. Because every single day, the captain would go around and talk to every single one of the men, figure out where their mental state was, and he would adjust their workload based off how well they were doing. And because of that ability for him to change the responsibility levels that he expected of people, which is, I expect you to do as much as you can do, not as much as I want you to do, right? And to be able to monitor people's states and do that accordingly, that is the essence of what it is, right? A person of a high enough level of self-mastery has to be able to recognize in other people, like, hey, I can't have the same expectations for everyone, right? Look at the parable of the talents, right? Like, the master gives one dude $1 and one dude $10 and one dude $100, and the guy with $100 goes and invests it and he makes $1 million. The guy with $10 invests it, he makes $100, and the master's like, hey, good job, you guys did a good job. The guy with $1 buries it and he's like, no, You're not supposed to bury it. You're supposed to do something with that, even if it's only $1. You need to go try, and then he kicks a guy out. And it's like that's the point, is that we should be, you should try as hard as you can with what you can do. Whether that's, if you're gonna go be Wim Hof and be the guy that can run up Everest with just shorts on, I'm not doing that. I don't care. I've done some crazy stuff by most people's standards. I'm not doing that. But it's what can you do with what you've been given, right?
Right.
I think that's it. And ultimately, what can you do for the people who have been given less, right? How do you take responsibility for them to
manage the conditions such that they're going to keep them from harm, right? Mm-hmm. That's about as good.
Yeah, sometimes I think that means shooting the crack dealer. Like, from an ethical perspective, so I think you do have to shoot the crack dealer. Like, I don't know.
I understand that as a metaphor, okay? Just for
I don't know how serious I am about that, to be honest. I might be.
I'm like just, it's a hypothetical.
Well, if you think about it, like,
I know I'm thinking about it. I have thought about it, so I don't want to speak of it really, though. Just like this, like it's broaching the unspeakable. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
in all human negotiation, the propensity for violence must remain on the table. Okay.
I would even say that in all human negotiation, the propensity for violence is always on the table, whether or not people are cognizant of that. There's a quote that I like, and I'm not some person with a great propensity for violence anyway, so it's not like I'm like, it's entirely possible I'm just talking shit here. But there's but I'm cognizant of that, so I think that's the important part, right? There's a quote that's something along the lines of like, savages have a greater appreciation for manners because the likelihood of them getting their throat ripped out is quite a bit higher than among civilized folk, or something. I kind of butchered that, but you get the gist.
They say that in Arizona, everybody's armed and it makes for a polite society. And
it seems to be the case.
You presume that everybody is armed and dangerous and mind your manners, everything will be better.
Oh, I mean, think about it. It's like how much discussion on Facebook or like the YouTube comment section or some disgusting cesspool of like,
yes.
How much of that would be solved if it was like, oh yeah, you have to say that to that person's face,
That's right. Well, that's a good start, Garrett. We've done well. We've covered some bases, and it's like this conversation, it's related to the reapplication of the morality to the process of thinking, and how we reintegrate this you call it the feminine with the masculine, the right brain with the left brain. That's the
chaos and order.
Right. And get things properly balanced. I think that's good. And it's like, but it's a wheel is way out of kilter right now. The wheel, go ahead.
You can see this as a theme in culture with stuff like in Star Wars. It's like, oh, you have to bring balance to the Force, right? Because that's the weird part. They don't really touch on this at any great depth in the movies, as far as I remember, but they don't say, oh, the light side of the Force needs to win, right? Yoda's like, bring balance to the Force, you must, right? That's really interesting, because it's like, obviously the dark side of the Force in this case is it's the Empire, it's empirical, it's orderly, it's very regimented, all their stuff is gray and black and drab and boxed in, right? And then you have like the weird rebel kind of more creative, ragtag band of people, that is in a sense is also a like kind of, there's a feminine component to that. And I actually generally, with the context of the earlier part of that, I think it's worth saying feminine. I normally say chaos and order, because there's both masculine chaos and feminine chaos. Masculine chaos would be like fascism, right? Feminine chaos would be like probably, I don't know, some like tribal society where they eat Dionysus. I don't know, it's different. And then like feminine order is different too, because there's like a naturally feminine kind of non-hierarchical system, like a flat, more egalitarian hierarchical system. And then like masculine order is obviously hierarchical and very clean and regimented. So there is both a feminine chaos and a masculine chaos. It's not that clean of a break. However, I do think in regards to the rationality thing, we really did demonize the feminine specifically. And that's why we have this hyper masculine worldview of hyper rationality, which itself has now become chaotic, which, so chaos isn't purely feminine, because I do normally associate
and I'd tell you it is. It's like hyper rational, but it's like this. It's what we know. And it's like, I know that I can cause people to believe things that are false, and it will benefit me greatly. And that's the chaos of it. It's like, just goes into just industrial lying.
Oh yeah. And it's heartbreaking, because it's like the worst part, I'm forgive them, for they know not what they do, right? Which is that's Christ on the cross, as he's to God basically says, hey, they don't get what they're doing. It's not their fault, right? And it's the same kind of thing. It's like, I really don't think the average person, even I like maybe the CEOs of these companies, I hold them to higher standards, because I assume they're higher functioning people. But it's like, how many of these people really understand the implications of what they're doing? Because I think if they did, they wouldn't do it, right? I really don't. But it's like hard to, if all your incentives in the world prevent you from seeing something, it's easier to thread a camel through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven. That's the notion of incentives, right? Is the rich man has every reason in the world not to want to give his money to the poor and stuff, and right. And it's like, it's hard to see what you have an incentive not to see, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's probably the hardest to see that which you have incentive not to see, right?
Right.
If people don't stay in the cave because they're chained to the cave, they stay in the cave because they're making money on the people who are paying for shadows on the wall, right? Like,
that's right.
So
that's it.
But I think ultimately we have to make a very good case, and we have to make it easy to see that, and then also just not demonize people who are like, that's part of the problem with, like, realistically, the really moral answer to shooting the crack dealer is actually you explain to the crack dealer why what he's doing is wrong, and don't shoot him, right?
Or you make a good show. You can make a good show of holding back someone who claims that he wants to shoot him.
Yeah,
it's just like shadows on the wall again, right? It's all art and rhetoric and deception, and it all plays part of the play.
What is it? All the world's a stage.
That's
but merely players.
That was wonderful. That's a wonderful ending. Garrett, I got to run. I got to go do my CrossFit thing, and I don't know what they're going to have me do, but I will go do my best.
There you go.
I want to thank you for taking a minute with me and sharing with the audience. It was very fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll do it again.
I love this show. I love coming on here. We always have fun. So
I never know quite where it's going to go either.
There's no possible way to know. There's no possible. Right. It's the same thing with my life. I think that's a recurring theme. It's just chaos, unadulterated chaos with some moments of clarity in between.
All right. Well, I thank you again, and you have a wonderful evening, sir.
You too. Thanks, Bradley.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Best Medicine Podcast with Bradley H. Werrell, D.O. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe below, either over there or over there. Also, if you're interested in a medical consultation with myself, there's also information below.